Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCollum and I'm here today in Thun, Switzerland visiting B&T, where we are taking a look at the development of the B&T USW, or Universal Service Weapon. This is a pistol that I've thought was really cool for quite a while. I actually did a Desert Brutality match with a P320 version of the USW a couple years ago. I'll link to that video in the description. But today we get to look at where this whole thing came from, and we get to take a look at a couple of the prototypes. So the origin of this was at a hockey game. Karl Brugger, head of B&T, is a big fan of hockey. He supports a local youth hockey team. He was at one of their games and they lost terribly. And he was looking at this, he's like, not only did you lose, you didn't even really try hard. This is really obnoxious. And he has a 2.5-hour drive home with a buddy, and he's pissed about the game, and they get in the car and he's like, let's never talk about this game again. Instead, let's talk about what sort of cool product we could make. And so over the course of a 2.5-hour car ride back to Thun, Karl and his buddy come up with basically the concept for the USW. As it happens, there had just recently been an incident in Zurich where a Swiss police officer had to actually use his service handgun, shoot at a bad guy, and he fired something like 7 shots and managed to wing the dude once in the leg. And this incident is on the news, and Brugger's thinking about this and going, geez, this cop needed to be able to make this shot. What would be, what would allow him to be better, more accurate, more effective? Well, what if he had a stock on the pistol and a red dot? And from that comes the concept of the USW. So Brugger comes back to his company here, B&T, and goes to engineering and basically says, here's the idea I have. Like, it's a pistol with a stock, and you put all the stuff together. You stick an extended mag, you have a rail for a light, so you can kind of have all the accessories. And the idea is it's compact enough that even with the stock, it can still be carried as a holstered pistol, as a standard carry pistol. It's not bulky like a carbine. Well, the engineering guys don't quite get the concept directly. They have some interesting ideas, but they kind of go in a different direction. And after a couple weeks of work, they come back with an idea, and Brugger's like, it's not, well, he's not very good at telling people they've done a bad job. So what he does instead is he grabs one of the other dudes in the engineering department and goes like, okay, we have a secret project. And the two of them together in secret take one of Brugger's own pistols, an AT-84 Sphinx, and convert it themselves kind of crudely into this concept that he has in mind. And then he takes that back to the engineering guys. He's like, here, I simplified the job, just make this. And so, well, that's pretty much what they end up doing. So this is, in fact, that very first example that was converted into the first USW. So let's take a closer look, and I'll show you what it is and then where it went. All right, so this is actually the very first concept USW, but over the course of the following development, the gun was updated and improved as some of the new elements came online. So as a first layout gun, it didn't have the stock. This is the final production stock that they added to it. It didn't have the optic. We'll get to that in just a moment. But the basic idea was to take, well, what they built this on was the AT-84 Sphinx, which was a Swiss-made copy of the CZ75. B&T actually purchased a bunch of parts from Sphinx when they went out of business. There's a whole separate series of videos that can be done about the Sphinx itself. But what we have here is essentially a Swiss CZ75. In order to make this, they built this essentially new chassis that has a fixed rear hub. So an optic can mount on this fixed platform, which does not move when the slide cycles. That requires having some way to actually charge the gun, because you can't grab it at the back. So they basically just welded on a small pair of grasping handles up there. Trigger standard, slide standard, magazines are still standard, but then there's a stock attached to the back. Now this is the final version of the stock. They would make these as prototypes in metal first, but the idea was to have a stock that is as thin and compact as possible. The length of pull is a little bit short, but it's essentially limited by the overall length of the gun, because you don't want the stock to be any longer than the gun. The idea is this is still a fully functional, effective pistol, can be carried holstered, but if you need to make precise shots, especially at longer ranges, and especially in areas where you might have a whole lot of, in competition we would call them no-shoots, this gives you a huge advantage over just a regular pistol, especially under stress. So if you think about this being used in situations like airports, sporting events in stadiums, schools, places where you may have to make a longer-ish shot as a police officer and you really don't want to hit a bystander, that's where this is intended to shine. Now, from that initial prototype came the USP XP, the experimental version. This is, at this point, we are in 2016. That's the first two numbers of the serial number indicate the year of production here. And B&T has started making their own slides with these grasping surfaces built in. The stock design has come together. They would later go ahead and make a polymer mold for the stock, but this one is still machined from aluminum. There is a button back here that allows you to fold the stock to the side, which locks into this channel in the front, just like that. That mechanism would change to essentially a spring catch. But this is the next like pre-production version. Now the optic on this is a really interesting piece of the story because there wasn't really a good small optic available at the time. And B&T has a really good relationship with Aimpoint, and so they went to Aimpoint and said essentially, look, here's a basic drawing of what we need, so you should build this. And Aimpoint basically went away and did. This was provided. This became known as the Aimpoint Nano. It was definitely the smallest thing that they were making at the time. It is a fully enclosed red dot, so it doesn't necessarily look like it, but it's not an open emitter. It's a closed emitter red dot, tiny little thing, and at the time, Aimpoint was not able to make an optic this small that was durable enough to mount on a moving slide. But for the USW, it's sitting on this fixed platform, and so that's how they were able to pull it off. Aimpoint produces this exclusively for B&T, and in fact, this is the early pre-production version of the Aimpoint Nano, where it's attached by two screws from the top down through these access holes in the top. Once all of these elements come into alignment, we end up with the USW A1. So this is the experimental version. B&T makes something like 15 or 18 of these, essentially to play with. Karl Brugger, takes a couple home to tinker with. He takes a couple to his shooting club, has his shooting buddies try them out. They do some experimenting in-house to see how they all work. And then the final version becomes the USW A1. And you can see this is 2017 production, so a little bit later. At this point, they have finalized the stock release mechanism. So now there's a little hook right there that locks into this catch. And when you push this latch forward, the stock pops out and you can then open it up and fix it in place. The Aimpoint Nano is finalized. It now has a clamp, a cross clamp on a dovetail rail, like a Picatinny rail down there, instead of the screws attaching from the top. Worth pointing out that this is the direct ancestor to the Aimpoint Acro. They changed the name from Nano because it turns out actually Beretta had trademarked that name for one of their pistols, and Aimpoint didn't want to get sued, so they changed the name away from Nano to Acro, and that's a whole story for itself. But you can see here we have the integrated slide grip surface. This gigantic green front sight blade is there essentially as an eye-catching thing. So when you bring the gun up on target, the Nano has a pretty small field of view. This is something to catch your eye and make sure that you align the gun on the front sight as it comes up on target. There is no rear iron sight on the USW to use. Now these all have threaded barrels. This one has a suppressor on it. This will make B&T sad, but I'm going to point out the fact that the suppressor is actually a little bit droopy because on the Sphinx, which is still the base pistol, they had a bunch of Sphinx parts to use, and it is in fact a good gun. The barrel actually points slightly downward when it's locked in battery. When it cycles back, then the barrel's horizontal. Normally, on most Browning lock pistols, the barrel's horizontal when it's in battery, and when you open it up, the barrel tilts upwards. The Sphinx, they just did it slightly differently. B&T also went and made extended magazines for the USWs, so this is a 30-round magazine to go with the gun. It will, of course, take standard length magazines as well. There's a rail on the front to mount a light if you want. You can really tactical these out with all of the accessories. But as a service pistol being carried by a beat cop, it would have been shoulder stock, Aimpoint Nano, probably a standard capacity magazine, maybe a flashlight, but not a suppressor. Suppressor kind of kills the ability to conveniently holster the gun. Now, as a production gun, the USW A1 was honestly never super successful. There were a total of 2,700 nanos manufactured, although not all of them went on USWs. 2 or 3 years ago, so about 2021, USW production ran out of nanos, and so they switched over to the Acro P2, which was by that point developed and available. It's a little bit bigger, but it's definitely a better optic. Where this project went, well, let me back up a moment. Part of the reason that this wasn't such a huge success is that it really is a proprietary sort of platform. In the United States, because of the stock, this is a short-barreled rifle. That really hindered its development in the US. And a lot of, I think, security and law enforcement agencies and military agencies liked the concept, but weren't really willing to go out and adopt a whole new pistol in order to get it. They already had guns that they liked, that they had gone through a significant amount of work and cost to procure. And so where this project went next was looking at how it could be adapted to other guns. So, for example, there was the idea of doing this on the Glock system instead of the AT-84 Sphinx. And so we have here one of B&T's prototypes, right there, for basically a Glock 17 USW. And you can see it has the same structure of a fixed bridge in the back that holds, in this case, a defective Aimpoint Nano, same stock. The issue here is really kind of the same one as on the original USW. This is going to be a short-barreled rifle in the US. It has to be, it's its own independent frame. It doesn't solve a lot of the problems. There are also some issues of this all being polymer. It's got some flex back here, which is potentially fragile. So this version wasn't really successful. It was an experiment. Instead, that ends up turning into this, where it's essentially an optics and stock mounting chassis that you fit a Glock into. You may think of something like the Israeli Roni conversions, except far more size efficient. The Roni turns a pistol into a really quite bulky carbine. This was the minimum necessary to attach the USW folding stock and a fixed mount for the sight. This also means you can take a regular stock Glock pistol and adapt it, drop it into one of these chassis without any tools, without any permanent modification. Because you don't have the opportunity to put cocking surfaces on a Glock slide that's already made, instead they put a folding charging handle on here. Of course I can't charge it because it's a solid blue gun, but a little bit of a compromise. It's a little bit of bulk sticking out the side of the gun, but you have the advantage of this being a very modular thing that can be installed on any existing Glock pistol. This is actually, it turns out, the most successful of the USW, like the outcomes of the USW program. So they do actually make a version of this compatible with the Glock 18. It has a cutout for the selector lever. There was a US government agency, which shall remain unnamed, which did in fact buy these for Glock 18s, as well as interest from a lot of international groups that actually I think it's a kind of cool situation, an idea where you have a group of people who are in potentially dangerous places carrying concealed pistols, Glocks, and they want to have the option in case of emergency to be able to convert those Glocks quickly and easily into pseudo carbines to be more effective, where all of a sudden, the riots have broken out on the streets, and now it's more important to have accurate, controllable fire than to have a very concealable gun. A chassis like this essentially can be zeroed and then removed, put away, and then installed in case of need. Not, carried on the person and dropped onto the gun in 3 seconds, but if the social situation becomes untenable, you can break this out and improve the capabilities of existing carry pistols. That's a cool idea. That's not something that I would have predicted myself. That same style of conversion chassis was also adapted to a number of other guns like the Walther PPQ. This is the prototype for that one. Also the CZ-P10. You can see there are a few differences, like using a top slide to charge the gun instead of a lever sticking out the side. So also options, these are elements that are in production, that are available from B&T, but not as popular as the Glock chassis. And then one place where this concept really ended up shining, and this is where my direct experience with the USW comes in, was with the SIG P320. Because the 320 has a chassis system where the serialized component is just the fire control group, it means that the stocked grip frame assembly can be sold independently. Unlike the USW A1, where the stocked grip frame is the serialized component and is a short-barreled rifle by itself, the P320, you can take an existing pistol, register it as a short-barreled rifle, and then separately drop it into the chassis. So one of the big differences with the 320 version is they didn't put a fixed bridge on to hold the optic. The optic is just still mounted to the slide. This is a really pretty easy conversion. It uses a standard 320 fire control module and slide assembly, and simply has a replacement grip frame that happens to include an extension on the back and a stock. So this is a 3D printed prototype from the development sequence, but these also went into production. They made them in both black and coyote tan, and this is what I used myself. So the downside here is the sight does reciprocate back and forth. Having a fixed non-mobile sight is a nice benefit to the other models of the other developments of the USW, but on the bright side, it's a much narrower platform because you don't have to have any cocking methodology on the gun, be it a slide on top or a lever on the back. The USW A1 is still a regular product for B&T, although it's made in limited runs because it's not the most popular thing that they make. The Aimpoint Nanos are gone. Instead, the ones made today are set up with Acro P2s, which is definitely a better optic. It's also a bigger optic. I'm kind of partial to the original Nano, but maybe that's just because I like the stuff that's not really available. I think this is a really cool concept. Like I said at the beginning, I did a Desert Brutality match with one of the P320 frame versions, and it definitely has its limitations, especially at range, especially with optics that aren't Aimpoint optics that have potentially pretty bad parallax shift. But within 50 to 100 meters, it really can be a game changer of a system, and it is very concealable, still holsterable with the stock. I think it's a really cool concept that I think will continue to get more attention. It's certainly partly hampered by the National Firearms Act, which makes the use of suppressors on it and just the use of stocked pistols really sort of a bureaucratic hassle for Americans. We're starting to see more development on stuff like this with things like the Flux Raider, now the P365 Flux Raiders. So I have hopes that this won't go away. I think this will be probably another one of B&T's products that 10 years down the road turns out to have been well ahead of its time. But we will find out. So hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. I'd like to give a big thanks to B&T for giving me access to all of the different prototypes you saw here, share them with you. Thanks for watching.